On a winter night in Cincinnati, Sylvia, pregnant, was thrown out of her wealthy family's mansion. 7 years later, she returned. They thought she had lost everything. Welcome to revenge drama, where the underestimated rewrite destiny. Hi, I am Sylvia. I am 29 years old. My parents gathered the entire extended family just to announce they were disowning me because I was pregnant. There wasn't a single word of concern, not an ounce of affection. My father stood on the high steps of the villa, clinking his wine glass to command attention, then pointed his finger straight at my face in front of over 30 relatives. They said, "All our children have brought honor to this family except Sylvia. She is pregnant without a husband. We no longer want her carrying this name." The air went dead silent. Every eye fixed on my 6-month baby bump like it was a dirty stain. I looked at my mom, hoping for even the weakest protection, but she turned her back, pretending to adjust her pearl necklace to save face with the guests. My sister stood nearby, arms crossed, watching me with a faint, contemptuous smirk. In that moment, I didn't cry, not because I wasn't in pain, but because I realized this place was never my home. I took a deep breath, my fingers grazing the old silver necklace at my throat. It was the only keepsake Grandma left me, along with her words, "When you have no one, remember, you still have yourself." I gripped my bag tighter, held my head high, looked at them one last time, and turned to walk out of those heavy iron gates without uttering a single word of begging. They thought that was the day I lost everything. They didn't know. That was the day they handed me my freedom. Hit subscribe and leave a comment below to see exactly how I made them regret it. The humidity of summer vanished, replaced by the bone-chilling winds of a Cincinnati winter that seemed intent on freezing the very marrow of my bones. I was living in a roadside motel on the outskirts of the city, a place where the neon sign flickered ominously and the walls were so thin I could hear the coughs of the strangers next door. My savings had evaporated within the first month. To survive, I stopped being Sylvia Sterling, the heiress, and became simply Sylvia, the woman who would do anything for cash. I didn't just wash dishes. I scrubbed toilets in diner bathrooms that smelled of bleach and regret. I moved crates at the back of grocery stores until my back screamed in protest. I shoveled snow off driveways for $5 a pop, ignoring the way the icy handle of the shovel bit into my palms. My hands, once manicured and soft, were now red-chapped and cracked, the skin splitting open in the dry cold. Every time I clenched my fist, fresh blood would seep from the knuckles, staining the cheap rags I used to wrap them. Then came the night of the blizzard. The snow was coming down in sheets, burying the city in white silence. I woke up not from the cold, but from a sharp, tearing pain in my lower abdomen. It was too early, or maybe I had lost track of time in the blur of survival. I didn't have a car. I didn't have a ride. With trembling fingers, I dialed 911 from the motel's landline, praying the lines weren't down. The ambulance ride was a haze of sirens and solitude. When they wheeled me into the charity ward of the university hospital, there were no private suites or attentive doctors waiting for me. I was placed in a large, open room separated only by thin curtains, surrounded by the sounds of the city's forgotten, the homeless, the uninsured, the destitute. "Name of the father," the intake nurse asked, her pen hovering over the clipboard, her eyes tired and indifferent. "None," I gritted out through a contraction. "Emergency contact family." I looked up at the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead, feeling a wave of isolation so profound it threatened to drown me right there on the gurney. Just me. It's just me. The labor was long and brutal. Without a hand to hold, I gripped the metal railing of the bed until my knuckles turned white. I didn't scream. I didn't want to give the world the satisfaction of hearing me break. When Leo finally arrived, his cry was the only thing that cut through the noise of the ward. He was small, terrifyingly fragile, but his eyes were wide open, dark, and searching. They discharged us 24 hours later. The hospital bill, even subsidized, was a staggering number for someone with nothing, but the immediate reality was worse. I needed formula diapers and heat. I stood in the motel room looking at Leo wrapped in a thin hospital blanket. He was crying a hungry, thin wail that pierced my heart. I checked my wallet. $3. Not enough for a can of formula. Not enough for anything. Panic, cold and sharp, rose in my throat. I looked around the dingy room searching for something, anything of value. There was nothing. Just my worn-out coat and a bag of dirty laundry. Then my hand flew to my throat. The silver necklace. Grandma's necklace. I unclamped it, the metal feeling heavy and warm against my freezing skin. It was the only link I had left to a time when I was loved. It was the only thing that proved I came from somewhere, that I wasn't just a drifter in a cheap motel. Selling it felt like severing my last limb. I looked at the necklace. Then I looked at Leo. His face was scrunching up, turning red as he prepared to scream from hunger again. The choice wasn't a choice at all. I bundled Leo up against my chest and walked out into the biting wind. The pawn shop was 3 blocks away. The bell above the door jingled as I stepped inside, the smell of stale smoke and desperation hitting me instantly. The broker behind the glass looked at me, then at the baby, his eyes devoid of sympathy. I slid the silver chain across the counter. It's vintage silver. Handcrafted. He barely glanced at it. $50. It's worth at least 200, I argued, my voice cracking. Please, my son needs to eat. 50. Take it or leave it. I looked at the silver gleaming under the harsh shop lights. It was my past. It was my dignity. But $50 was formula. $50 was warmth. Take it, I whispered. As he handed me the crumpled bills, something inside me shifted. I didn't cry. I didn't look back at the necklace as it was swept into a drawer. I walked out of that shop, the cold air hitting my face, but I didn't feel weak anymore. I felt dangerous. I had just sacrificed the only thing I had left for the only person who mattered. The girl who was kicked out of the mansion died in that pawn shop. The woman who walked out was a mother who would burn the world down before she let her son starve again. 2 years is enough time to forget the sound of your own laughter, but it is not enough time to forget who you were born to be. My life had fallen into a rhythmic, exhausting grind. By day, I slept in short bursts while 2-year-old Leo played quietly with secondhand toys in our small rented basement apartment. By night, I became a ghost, haunting the corridors of Cincinnati's corporate world. I was a cleaner for the night shift at Empire Real Estate, one of the most prestigious firms in the city. It was ironic. Before the disownment, before the pregnancy, I was a top-tier law student. I had spent nights burying my head in textbooks on contract law and property rights, dreaming of becoming a partner at a firm just like this. Now I was emptying the trash cans of people who were likely less qualified than I was. I couldn't afford a babysitter, and the night care centers were too expensive. So I took a risk every single night. I brought Leo with me. I set up a makeshift bed for him in the large ventilated supply closet on the 40th floor, surrounded by rolls of paper towels and cleaning fluids. He was a good sleeper, a quiet child who seemed to understand that our survival depended on his silence. It was 2:00 a.m. on a Tuesday when my life shifted again. I was vacuuming the executive suite belonging to Constance Blackwood, the legendary and feared owner of the firm. Her desk was a chaotic sea of paperwork. As I reached over to dust the mahogany surface, my eyes caught the bold title on a legal document: Acquisition Agreement, the West End Project. It was a reflex. I shouldn't have looked, but the legal jargon called to me like a familiar song. I stopped dusting. I leaned in, scanning the paragraphs. My eyes narrowed. There, buried in the subsection regarding environmental liability, was a fatal error. The zoning citation was outdated. If Constance signed this, she would be liable for millions in cleanup costs that weren't hers to pay. I looked at the sleeping city outside the window, then at the pen holder. The rational part of me screamed to walk away. I was the help. I was invisible. But the law student in me, the Sylvia who had been silenced for 2 years, couldn't let it slide. I grabbed a red marker from her desk. With a trembling hand, I circled the clause, drew a sharp arrow to the margin, and wrote 2 words: statute expired. Then I put the pen back, finished cleaning, and prayed I wouldn't be fired. The next evening, I wasn't allowed to start my shift. The security guard at the front desk stopped me. "Mrs. Blackwood wants to see you. Now." My stomach dropped. I instructed the guard to watch Leo in the lobby for 5 minutes, lying that I needed to grab my paycheck, and took the elevator up. Constance was waiting. She was 60, elegant, with eyes that could cut glass. The document was on her desk, the red ink screaming against the white paper. "Did you do this?" she asked, her voice dangerously calm. "I did," I replied, standing straight in my gray uniform. "The zoning code cited there changed in 2018. The seller is trying to dump the remediation costs on you." Constance stared at me for a long, uncomfortable minute. She didn't thank me. She didn't smile. She opened a drawer and pulled out a thick, disorganized stack of files, foreclosure records that looked like a nightmare of paperwork. "I don't need a cleaner who knows the law," she said coldly. "I need an asset. This stack is a mess of lien disputes. Organize it, summarize the risks. You have until morning." "I have a shift to finish," I said. "Forget the floors," she snapped. "Fix the files." I worked through the night, fueled by adrenaline and stale coffee. I didn't just organize them. I built a strategy for each property. When Constance arrived at 7 a.m., the stack was gone, replaced by a single crisp 3-page summary. She read it in silence. Then she looked up. "You're wasted on a vacuum cleaner, Sylvia. But I don't hand out charity. You start as a trainee assistant. Minimum wage probation period. If you survive 3 months, we'll talk about a career." I survived. I thrived. 3 months later, I was no longer wearing a uniform. I was dressed in a simple, thrifted blazer, carrying files across the marble lobby of the Empire Building. I was officially a junior analyst. The elevator doors opened and my heart stopped. Standing there, tapping a designer heel impatiently against the floor, was my sister Sabrina. She looked expensive, polished, and utterly out of place in my new world. She was holding a leather folder, likely running an errand for our father, whose company was struggling to manage its own properties. Her eyes landed on me. First there was confusion, then recognition, and finally a sneer. "Sylvia!" She laughed, a sharp barking sound. She looked me up and down, taking in my cheap shoes and the stack of papers in my arms. "I heard you were scrubbing toilets in town. Did they finally let you carry the paper trash too?" "I work here, Sabrina," I said, my voice steady though my pulse raced. She stepped closer, invading my personal space, smelling of the same expensive perfume my mother wore. She glanced at the complex foreclosure analytics in my hand. "Oh, please," she whispered, her voice dripping with venom. "Don't pretend you're reading that. We all know you dropped out. Do you really think the brain of a lowly single mom can understand corporate contracts?" She poked a manicured finger at the file against my chest. "Stick to mopping, darling. It's all you're good for." She breezed past me toward the reception, not waiting for a response. I stood frozen in the lobby. The old Sylvia would have cried. The new Sylvia, the one who had survived winter and impressed Constance Blackwood, simply tightened her grip on the files. Let her laugh, I thought, watching the elevator doors close on her smirk. She has no idea she just walked into the lion's den. 5 years flowed by like the currents of the Ohio River, relentless and powerful. I was no longer the exhausted assistant stealing glances at legal files. I was the founder and CEO of Phoenix Holdings, a boutique investment firm operating out of a sleek, glass-walled office overlooking the very city that had once tried to freeze me to death. My reputation in Cincinnati was built on a simple, terrifying premise. I bought what others were too afraid to touch, and I turned it into gold. But today, Looking at the dossier on my desk, I wasn't looking for profit. I was looking for justice. Are you sure about this, Sylvia? My attorney David, a man with sharp instincts and sharper suits, looked at me with genuine concern. He tapped the thick file labeled Sterling Manufacturing, Debt Portfolio. The bank has classified this as a toxic asset, David warned. It's not just bad debt, Sylvia, it's fraud. Your father didn't just lose money, he cooked the books. He inflated the inventory value to secure massive loans from the bank to cover up your brother's gambling losses and his own failed ventures. He's been robbing Peter to pay Paul for years. I picked up the audit report. It was pathetic, really. Arthur Sterling, the man who preached about honor and integrity on his front porch, had resorted to the oldest trick in the book, falsifying financial statements to maintain the illusion of wealth. He had mortgaged everything: the factory, the brand, and finally the family estate in Indian Hill, based on lies. The bank found out last month during a surprise audit, David continued. They are panicking. They want to offload the entire debt package quietly to avoid a public scandal before the quarterly review. They are selling it for 60 cents on the dollar, but it requires immediate liquidity. Cash. By Friday. I knew what immediate liquidity meant. It meant money I didn't have sitting in my operating account. My capital was tied up in 3 other renovation projects in over the Rhine. To buy this debt, to hold the deed to my father's house and the fate of his company in my hands, I had to liquidate my personal assets. I swiveled my chair around to look at the photo of Leo on my credenza. He was 7 now, sitting on the front steps of the modest but beautiful bungalow I had bought for us 3 years ago. It was our sanctuary. It was the first place Leo had his own room, the first place that felt safe. I'm selling the house, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. David dropped his pen. Your house, Sylvia, that's madness. That's your safety net. If this goes sideways, if you can't liquidate the Sterling assets fast enough, you and Leo will be homeless. Again. I'm not doing this for the assets, David. I'm doing it for the leverage. I stood up and walked to the window. I could see the reflection of a woman who had once sold her grandmother's necklace to buy milk. I had clawed my way up from the bottom brick by brick. I had built a fortress around myself and my son. Now I was about to dismantle the foundation of that fortress to build a cannon. List the bungalow, I ordered, turning back to him. Market it as an immediate cash sale to investors. I'll move Leo and myself into a temporary rental apartment downtown. We handle the paperwork for the Sterling debt acquisition concurrently. It's an all-in bet, David said, shaking his head, though I saw a flicker of admiration in his eyes. You're risking your home to own theirs. No, I corrected him. I'm risking a building. They risked their souls years ago. I'm just collecting the bill. The next 48 hours were a blur of high-stakes maneuvering. I signed the deed to our beloved bungalow over to a developer with a shaking hand, feeling a pang of guilt as I packed Leo's toys into cardboard boxes. I told him we were going on an urban adventure, to a high-rise masking the reality that his mother was betting everything she owned on a vengeance strategy. When the wire transfer hit the bank's account on Friday afternoon, the atmosphere in my office shifted. The air felt heavier, charged with static. David placed the final document in front of me. It wasn't a renovation plan. It was the assignment of mortgage and note. As of this moment, David said softly, the bank is out. You are the sole creditor. You own the mortgage on the Indian Hill estate. You own the liens on the factory equipment. Technically, Arthur Sterling lives in your house. I picked up my pen. The same hand that had once cracked from the cold winter air now held the power to evict the people who had cast me out. I signed my name, Sylvia Sterling, in black ink. The loops were sharp, decisive. I looked down at the signature. The gamble was made. The chips were on the table. And the house of Sterling was already crumbling. They just didn't know the demolition crew was coming to dinner. The ink on the acquisition papers had barely dried when my phone rang. It was a Wednesday evening, the kind of quiet, humid night typical of the Ohio Valley. I was in our temporary apartment watching Leo finish his homework when the screen lit up. The caller ID displayed a number I hadn't seen in 7 years, yet I knew it by heart. The Sterling Estate, landline. I stared at it for a long moment, the vibration buzzing against the wooden table like a warning. Then I swiped green and put the phone to my ear. "Hello, Sylvia." The voice was unmistakable. High-pitched, perfectly modulated, dripping with a sugary sweetness that barely masked the steel underneath. It was my mother, Regina. "Oh, thank goodness you picked up. I wasn't sure if you could afford a phone plan these days." It was a classic Regina opening a greeting wrapped in an insult. "Hello, Mother," I said, my voice calm, betraying nothing of the storm inside me. "To what do I owe the pleasure?" "Well, darling, your father and I have been doing a lot of praying lately." She sighed, a theatrical sound. "We realize that life is too short for grudges. This Saturday is our 40th wedding anniversary. It's going to be a grand affair, the event of the season in Indian Hill. We want you to come." I paused. They want me there, after 7 years of silence. Then came the pivot. "But listen, Sylvia." Her tone dropped, becoming conspiratorial. "We're in a bit of a bind. We had to let go of our event planner last week. She was simply incompetent. Theft, actually. Can you imagine? So we are strictly understaffed for the kitchen coordination. I remembered that you used to be so good at domestic tasks, and I heard through the grapevine that you worked in the service industry for a while." I almost laughed. She didn't want a daughter. She wanted a head of catering she didn't have to pay. They hadn't fired the planner for theft. They had fired her because they couldn't cut the check. "You want me to manage the kitchen?" I asked. "Just to oversee the servers, darling. Make sure the champagne flows and the canapes are hot. You can stay in the back, of course, so you don't feel uncomfortable mingling with the guests. You know how fancy these people can be. I wouldn't want you to feel out of place in your casual clothes." She was inviting me to my childhood home to work as a servant. "I'll do it," I said. "I'll make sure everything runs perfectly." "Oh, wonderful. You're saving us truly. Come to the service entrance around 4 p.m. Don't be late." Click. She hung up without asking about her grandson. Not one word about Leo. I set the phone down, a cold smile touching my lips. The service entrance. She had no idea that the woman walking through that door would own the door itself. 5 minutes later, my laptop pinged with a notification. An email. Subject: confidential. Real estate inquiry. From sabrina.sterling@sterlinggroup.com. I opened it. My sister Sabrina, the one who had mocked my intelligence in the lobby of Empire Real Estate, was writing to me. But she hadn't CC'd our parents. This was private. "Sylvia, I'm writing this against my better judgment, but I heard a rumor that you're working as some sort of low-level broker now. I have a small plot of land, the creek lot Grandma left me. I need to liquidate it. Immediately. I have some unexpected expenses. Credit cards are a nightmare you wouldn't understand since you don't have them. I need $20,000 in cash by Monday. I know you deal with the bottom feeders of the market, so find me a buyer. Do not tell Mom and Dad. If you pull this off, I'll give you a 1% commission. That should cover your rent for a month. Get it done." Sabrina. I leaned back in my chair, reading the desperation between the arrogant lines. The unexpected expenses were likely her husband's debts, or her own shopping addiction trying to fill the void of a loveless marriage. She was selling her inheritance behind our parents' backs, assuming I was desperate enough to scramble for a 1% scrap. I typed a reply instantly. "Sabrina, I have a buyer ready who can pay cash tomorrow. Bring the deed to the party on Saturday. I'll handle the rest." I closed the laptop. The trap was set. They were inviting me into their home to use me to hide their shame and to exploit my labor. They saw a desperate single mother, a servant, a low-level hustler. They were blinded by their own prejudice. Mom. I turned around. Leo was standing there holding his blazer. He looked sharp, older than his 7 years. He had heard the phone call. He saw the look on my face. Are we going to Grandma's house? He asked, his voice hesitant. Is she going to be mean to us again? I walked over to him and knelt down, buttoning his shirt. I looked into his eyes that had seen too much struggle, too many cold winters. We are going to the house. Leo, I said softly, but not to visit. Then why? I stood up and smoothed the lapels of his jacket, my hands steady and strong. Because they think they summoned a servant, I said, my voice hardening into steel. But they summoned the landlord. Today we are not going to a party, Leo. We are going to demand justice. The gravel of the circular driveway crunched beneath the tires of the black luxury sedan as we pulled up to the front entrance of the Sterling estate. It was glowing with golden light music spilling out onto the manicured lawns of Indian Hill. Before I opened the door, David, my attorney, turned from the front seat. He didn't smile. His expression was professional and grave. Sylvia. He lowered his voice to a whisper. I just got the confirmation from the county recorder. The filing went through at 9:00 a.m. this morning. The title transfer is complete. You are the legal owner of this property. It's done. I nodded, feeling a cold calm settle over me. Thank you, David. I stepped out of the car, extending a hand to Leo. We were not dressed for the kitchen. I wore a tailored cream suit that screamed authority, and Leo looked like a miniature heir in his black blazer. We walked up the stone steps, ignoring the service path that wound around the side. At the massive oak double doors, a hired security guard hesitated, glancing at his guest list. But before he could speak, the doors swung open. Sabrina was standing there holding a glass of champagne. Her eyes widened in shock, scanning my outfit, then Leo's, then the confident set of my jaw. What do you think you're doing? She hissed, stepping forward to block our path. Mom told you the service entrance, and why are you dressed like that? You look ridiculous. Get to the kitchen before someone sees you. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. Move, Sabrina. I said, my voice low but carrying the weight of a command. You can't come in here. I stepped past her, my shoulder brushing hers with enough force to make her stumble slightly in her heels. Leo held my hand tightly, his head held high, just as I had taught him. We walked straight into the grand ballroom. The room was a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. The air smelled of expensive perfume and hypocrisy. These were the creditors my father was trying to charm, the investors he was trying to swindle one last time. At the front of the room, on a raised stage, my father, Arthur Sterling, stood under a crystal chandelier. He was holding a microphone, his face flushed with the rosy glow of alcohol and deceit. Behind him, a massive projector screen displayed a slideshow of our family history, carefully edited to exclude me. Integrity. Arthur boomed, his voice trembling with feigned emotion. That is the foundation of the Sterling legacy. For 40 years, Regina and I have built this family and this company on the pillars of honesty and trust. We have weathered storms, but we remain standing because we value loyalty above all else. The crowd applauded politely. My mother stood by his side, beaming that practiced plastic smile. I let go of Leo's hand. Stay with David, I whispered. I walked down the center aisle. The clicking of my heels on the marble floor cut through the applause. Heads turned. Whispers started, a ripple of confusion that spread from the back of the room to the front. Arthur saw me. His smile faltered, twitching at the corners. He clearly thought I was there to cause a scene, perhaps to beg, or maybe he thought I was confused about my role as the kitchen help. And here, Arthur stammered, trying to recover, well, family is always full of surprises. I didn't stop until I reached the stage stairs. I walked up them, the sound of my ascent echoing in the sudden silence. I didn't look at my father. I walked past him to the podium where the laptop controlling the presentation sat. Sylvia, get down. My mother hissed from the side, her smile frozen in terror. You are embarrassing us. I pulled the HDMI cable from their laptop and plugged it into my phone. The screen behind us flickered. The slideshow of smiling family photos vanished. In its place, a high-resolution, legally notarized document appeared. It was projected 10 feet tall, impossible to miss. Certificate of Title, Hamilton County Auditor, Property, 1400 Indian Hill Boulevard. Owner, Sylvia Sterling. Date today. A collective gasp went through the room. It was a sound I would never forget, the sound of a lie shattering. Arthur spun around, staring at the screen. He squinted, reading the fine print, his face draining of color until he looked like a ghost. The glass of champagne in his hand shook violently. What? What is this? He choked out the microphone, picking up his ragged breath. I took the microphone from his trembling hand. The feedback whined for a split second, then silenced the room completely. I looked out at the sea of faces, the elite of Cincinnati, the people who had shunned me 7 years ago based on his lies. Then I turned to look Arthur dead in the eye. You were just speaking about integrity. Arthur, I said, my voice steady and amplified, filling every corner of the mansion. You spoke about legacy. Sylvia, stop, he whispered, a desperate plea. You're right. I continued, addressing the crowd but keeping my eyes on him. Family is the most important thing. But it's a pity you sold it cheap 7 years ago when you kicked a pregnant girl out into the snow. I gestured to the giant document looming over us. You cooked the books, Arthur. You defrauded these investors. And when the bank came to collect, they sold your debt to me. I didn't come here to serve appetizers. I took a step closer, my voice dropping to a lethal calm. I came to collect. This house is now mine. The silence that followed my declaration was short-lived. It was broken not by an apology but by the sound of abandonment. The elite of Cincinnati, the people my father had spent a lifetime trying to impress, didn't rush to the stage to offer support. Instead, they turned their backs. The room filled with the hushed rustle of expensive silk and the clicking of heels on marble as the guests scuttled toward the exits, eager to distance themselves from the stench of scandal. Within 2 minutes, the grand ballroom was empty save for the family that had destroyed itself. That was when the facade finally crumbled. My father, Arthur, who had stood so proudly moments ago, suddenly clutched his chest. His face turned an ashen gray, and he slumped heavily against the podium, gasping for air. Arthur. Oh my God, Arthur. My mother, Regina, screamed, her plastic composure shattering into hysterical sobs. She rushed to him, fanning his face with a napkin. I watched them from the bottom of the stairs. 7 years ago, I might have run to him. I might have panicked. Now I simply turned to David. Call 911. I said, my voice devoid of emotion. Tell them it's a suspected mild cardiac event. The paramedics can handle it. Sylvia. Regina wailed, looking down at me with mascara running down her cheeks. How can you stand there? He's your father. He's dying. He's not dying, Mother. I said, calmly observing his breathing. He's having a panic attack because he realized the consequences of his actions have finally arrived. It's stress, not a tragedy. While my parents played out their medical drama, the younger generation turned on each other. This is your fault, Sabrina shrieked, shoving Preston hard in the chest. If you hadn't gambled away the operating capital, Dad wouldn't have had to cook the books. Me. Preston roared back, his face red with rage. You're the one who's been maxing out the company credit cards for your business trips to Paris. You drained the liquidity just as fast as I did. Stop it. Regina screamed at them, but they ignored her, their voices echoing in the cavernous room like wild animals fighting over a carcass. It was a pathetic, ugly display. This was the honor they had tried to protect. This was the legacy they were so proud of. It was nothing but greed and finger-pointing. I walked up the stairs one last time, stepping between them. I didn't shout. I didn't have to. The authority of ownership gave me a presence that silenced them instantly. Enough, I said. They froze, looking at me, the sister they had mocked, the daughter they had discarded. I am not interested in your blame game, I told them, my eyes sweeping over each of their faces. And I am not interested in your apologies. You have exactly 24 hours. What? Preston stammered. 24 hours. I repeated, checking my watch. By 9 p.m. tomorrow, the locks will be changed. Anything left inside this house will be considered abandoned property and will be hauled to the landfill. I suggest you start packing. Sylvia, please. My mother grabbed my arm, her grip desperate. Where will we go? This is our home. We're family. I gently but firmly removed her hand from my sleeve. You have legs, I said, echoing the sentiment they had shown me years ago. And you have each other. Isn't that what matters? As for where you go, I hear the Motel 6 on the highway has vacancies. It's where I stayed the night Leo was born. I turned my back on them. I walked down the stairs, took Leo's hand, and led him toward the door. Behind us, the wailing started again, but it sounded distant, like noise from a television in another room. We walked out into the cool night air, leaving the toxicity sealed behind the heavy oak doors. We got into my car. The engine purred to life, drowning out the last echoes of the Sterling estate. Leo buckled his seatbelt and looked at me. Did we win, Mom? He asked quietly. I looked at him, my brave, kind, resilient boy. Yes, Leo. I smiled, putting the car in drive. We won. Because we aren't like them. As we drove down the winding driveway, watching the mansion disappear in the rearview mirror, I felt a lightness I hadn't known in 7 years. I didn't keep the house. I didn't move in, and I certainly didn't live there. To me, that mansion wasn't a prize. It was a museum of lies. A week later, I sold the Indian Hill estate to a developer for full market value. But I didn't keep the money either. I took every single dollar from the sale, millions of them, and I started a foundation. It's called the Silver Lining Scholarship. It provides full housing, tuition, and childcare for single mothers who want to finish their degrees, but were forced to choose between survival and their dreams. My family lost everything because they thought power came from looking down on people. They were wrong. The best revenge isn't burning their house down or holding on to hate. The best revenge is using your success to build a shelter for someone else, so no one ever has to feel as cold as I did that winter. That is the only legacy worth leaving.